When humans hunted nothing, how Ice Age predators dominated early man. That title feels definitive, doesn't it? A story about dominance, about predators and prey, about the food chain stacked firmly against us. But here's what I'm going to show you over the next few minutes. The opposite is often true. Early humans didn't just survive in a world ruled by predators, they thrived. And the reason has almost nothing to do with strength or speed. Subscribe right now if you're curious about how our ancestors actually made it through the Pleistocene, and in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me which Ice Age creature terrifies you the most, or which one you think you could have stood against. I'll be reading those. Hold on, I need you to pay close attention to something crucial right now. The evidence that contradicts the popular narrative about Ice Age predators and early humans is hiding in plain sight across dozens of dig sites and bone beds. If you want to understand the real mechanisms behind how humans carved out their place in this ecosystem, the survival strategies, the behavioral patterns, the exact ways they outmaneuvered creatures far larger, our complete guide to Pleistocene dominance and human innovation is waiting in the description and pinned in the top comment. It's a resource that walks through the archaeological evidence point by point, and it's going to give you the full picture. 20,000 years ago, the world looked nothing like what most people imagine. We picture the Ice Age as this monolithic wall of frozen wasteland. In reality, the Pleistocene wasn't a single climate state. It was a constant conversation between ice and warmth, between periods of crushing cold and surprising thaws. These cycles created something extraordinary, a patchwork of habitats that supported more large animal biomass than anywhere on Earth today. The steppe tundra that dominated North America from what is now Alaska down through the Great Plains and into Mexico wasn't a barren snowscape. It was a grassland, a sea of vegetation that stretched in every direction, held together by cold temperatures and preserved by frost, but rich with forage. Grasses grew there that could feed creatures weighing 10 tons. Shrubs persisted, mosses carpeted the ground, and where vegetation thrived, herbivores gathered in herds. Picture it this way. The African savanna we see today, the one filled with wildebeest and zebras and buffalo stretching from horizon to horizon, holds roughly 60 million pounds of large animal biomass per 1,000 square kilometers. The Pleistocene steppe of North America could hold double that, maybe triple. The sheer abundance of prey animals would have been something early humans had simply never encountered before. Mammoths alone, just that one species, roamed across the continent in populations that may have numbered in the millions. The woolly mammoth, the steppe mammoth, and the imperial mammoth all coexisted in different ranges and different time periods, each one a living mountain of meat. A single mammoth could feed a human group for months. That's not hyperbole, that's archaeology. Bone sites from mammoth kills show butchering marks that indicate humans were processing every usable part of these animals for meat, bone, ivory, and hide. But mammoths weren't alone. Ground sloths the size of elephants roamed the grasslands. Camels, actual camels, native to North America before they disappeared, grazed in herds. Horses, different from modern horses, moved in large groups. Bison species that made modern bison look small by comparison covered the plains. Giant armadillos called glyptodonts, protected by shells nearly as hard as armor, dug burrows large enough for humans to shelter in during storms. Toxodons, barrel-shaped herbivores that weighed as much as a car, lived in scattered populations throughout the continent. The prey base was so abundant that a small group of humans, 8 people, 12 people, sometimes fewer, could follow a single herd and live well on the animals they could kill in a season. They didn't need to hunt every day. They didn't need to be faster or stronger than their prey. They just needed to be smarter. And that's where the story changes. Predators, even the largest, fastest, most lethal predators that ever walked the continent, still had to hunt for survival. Short-faced bears weighing 1,000 kilograms, saber-tooth cats that could bring down a bison with a single bite, dire wolves running in packs of 10 or more. These were apex predators with all the advantages of size, speed, and predatory instinct, but they were still competing for the same prey. And they still had to win that competition through raw physical ability, strength against strength, strategy confined to the immediate moment. Humans had something else. They had sustained memory. They could plan across seasons. They could work in coordinated groups. They could observe patterns that took years to recognize. They could craft weapons that turned a smaller, weaker body into a lethal force. A human with a spear wasn't competing in the same arena as a bear. Humans were playing a different game entirely. That difference would prove to be the most important advantage any animal had in the Pleistocene. The question nobody asks is simple but brutal. If humans were the weakest hunters in this world, how did they survive at all? Not just survive, how did they thrive enough to populate 2 continents and outlast every giant predator that shared their territory? The answer begins with a hunt that went wrong. 14,000 years ago, in what is now the Great Basin of Nevada, a group of humans had tracked a Colombian mammoth for 3 days. The mammoth was massive, 10 tons of muscle and bone, standing nearly 4 meters tall. Its tusks curved upward in perfect crescents, weapons that could skewer any animal foolish enough to charge straight on. But this mammoth wasn't healthy. It was old. Its teeth were worn nearly to the gum line, meaning it was struggling to feed itself. The humans recognized that. They recognized weakness in a way that no dire wolf pack ever could, because they could talk about it, remember it, plan around it. They didn't attack directly. Instead, they drove it toward a canyon they knew well, a place they had scouted days before. The mammoth, weakened and confused, stumbled. It fell, and in those moments of vulnerability, the humans moved in with their spears. This wasn't ambush predation like a saber-tooth cat would execute. This was something far more calculated. It was engineering. It was using the landscape itself as a weapon. It was understanding cause and effect across time and distance. Hold on, I need to pause here for something critical. You're watching a channel dedicated to understanding these Ice Age giants as living, breathing creatures, not as museum exhibits. The real depth of what allowed humans to dominate this world, the actual mechanisms of how they outthought and outplanned every predator in existence, that's all explored in our comprehensive guide available in the description and pinned in the top comment. It goes far deeper into the cognitive revolution, the development of language, and the strategic innovations that gave humans their edge. It's a paid resource, but it contains the actual evidence that transforms this from storytelling into genuine understanding. Predators in this era had no such advantages. A dire wolf pack operated on dominance hierarchy and immediate reward. The strongest members ate first. Subordinates ate what remained. If a hunt failed, they simply hunted again. There was no forward planning, no discussion about avoiding the canyon tomorrow because a mammoth fell there last season. No memory of patterns that stretched across years or decades. Humans had all of that. Archaeological evidence from sites across North America shows something remarkable. Human hunting became increasingly sophisticated over millennia. Early tools were crude. Simple, but by the time humans reached their peak in the Pleistocene, they had developed spear throwers, devices called atlatls, that could hurl a projectile with the force of a modern rifle. They had learned to use fire not just for warmth, but as a tool to drive herds off cliffs. They had mastered the art of cooperative hunting well enough to bring down animals that weighed more than 3 male lions combined. What's extraordinary is that this knowledge was cumulative. A human child could learn everything their parent knew about hunting strategy, animal behavior, seasonal migration patterns, and weapon craft. A dire wolf pup could learn basic pack tactics, but a human could inherit 10,000 years of accumulated hunting strategy, compressed into lessons learned over a lifetime and passed down to the next generation. That's the real transformation. Not speed, not teeth, not strength, memory, passed forward, strategy, refined across generations, tools, improved upon each time a better solution was discovered. Language, allowing hunters to coordinate beyond the simple aggression displays that ruled pack hierarchies. This is where human dominance truly began. Before we continue, I need you to think about something specific for a moment. Everything you've learned so far about Ice Age predators, the dire wolves, the bears, the saber-tooths, those details matter because they shaped human behavior in real time. But the deeper patterns, the actual mechanisms that allowed humans to survive and eventually thrive in this landscape, those insights are spelled out in complete detail in the comprehensive guide available in the description and pinned to the top comment. It's a paid resource, and it goes far deeper than we can cover here. Now, that accumulation of knowledge matters more than anything else we've discussed. A dire wolf learned to hunt by watching its mother, but that education had limits. A saber-tooth kitten observed its mother's kills, understood the basics of positioning and strike timing, but each generation started essentially where the last one left off. There were no written instructions. There was no way to pass along a discovery that took 3 months to perfect. There was only the immediate visual lesson, and then the individual had to apply it. Humans operated in a completely different system. An older human hunter didn't just show a younger man how to throw a spear. He explained why you aimed for the ribs, not the skull. He described the exact angle that made the spear slip between the bones. He told stories about hunts that had failed and why they'd failed. He taught his student to read the wind, to notice the subtle shift in an animal's posture that meant it was about to bolt. He taught patience, not because patience was instinctive, but because patience could mean the difference between eating for a month and starving. This knowledge became encoded in language. Language became encoded in ceremony and story. Stories were told repeatedly, refined with each telling, until the most important survival lessons became nearly impossible to forget. They became part of the group's identity, the things you learned before you learned anything else. The saber-tooth cat never had this advantage. Neither did the short-faced bear. Neither did the dire wolf. Their nervous systems, however advanced, couldn't store and transmit information the way human language could. They couldn't improve upon their parents' techniques because they had no mechanism for improvement beyond trial and error. Humans had language. Humans had memory. Humans had the ability to ask questions and receive answers. A young hunter could ask his father why the mammoth herd always moved north in late summer, and his father could explain the ice melt in the mountains, the new grass emerging in the high valleys, the timing that had been observed and refined across generations of his ancestors. That knowledge, accumulated over centuries or even millennia, gave humans an almost supernatural ability to predict where prey would be and when. No other predator on this continent could do that. No other animal could look at the stars and know which season was approaching. No other animal could remember a successful hunt from a decade earlier and apply that exact strategy to a completely different animal in a completely different location. Humans could do all of this because they could talk about it. That's the real reason they survived when the giants died. Communication was their weapon. Not spears, not fire, not intelligence alone. The ability to sit around a flame at night and say to another person, "Remember when we hunted the mastodon near the river valley? We should try that same approach with the ground sloth tomorrow," transformed humans from just another mouth competing for scraps into something altogether different. They became a species that could learn collectively. One person's experience became everyone's advantage. The dire wolves hunted alone or in small packs because they had no way to share complex knowledge beyond basic growls and body language. Saber-tooth cats were extraordinary predators, but each cat had to learn its own lessons through trial and error. A young saber-tooth that watched its mother hunt learned some basics through observation, but it could never truly understand the why behind those movements. Humans, though, humans could explain the why. They could describe the terrain they hadn't visited in 3 years well enough that another hunter could find it again. They could warn a young person about the dangers of approaching a short-faced bear without that young person having to nearly die first to understand the risk. This gave humans something that predators could never achieve: institutional memory. And frankly, this is the part that still bothers me when I think about it. The big cats, the bears, the wolves, they were all bound by the limitations of individual learning. Even the smartest short-faced bear couldn't improve its hunting strategy beyond what its own experience taught it. But humans built on each other's knowledge. Every generation started with the wisdom of all previous generations already loaded into their minds. Before we continue, I need you to focus on something crucial here. The dynamics we're discussing, how humans used language and planning to overcome physical disadvantage. Those mechanisms are explained in tremendous depth in our complete ebook guide on Pleistocene predator strategy and human survival. It's available in the description and it's pinned in the comments. This isn't free material, but if you want to understand the real science behind how our ancestors actually outthought the megafauna rather than just outmuscled them, that guide breaks down the archaeological and behavioral evidence in ways this video simply can't. Consider what this meant in practical terms. A group of humans could spread out across several miles of terrain and coordinate a hunt without being in direct sight of each other. The short-faced bears that ruled those same landscapes couldn't do that. Each bear hunted within a territory it could see and smell. Humans could plan a hunt that unfolded across geography and time in ways that required cooperation and communication. Some of the most compelling evidence for this comes from the La Brea tar pits in what is now California. Thousands of fossils have been excavated there, and the pattern tells an extraordinary story. Predator fossils heavily outnumber prey fossils at that site. Why? Because the tar pits trapped prey animals first. When mammoths, bison, or camels got stuck, the predators came to feed on the trapped animals and got trapped themselves. Dire wolves, saber-tooth cats, giant bears, all of them fell victim to the same tar that caught their prey. But human remains found at La Brea are sparse. Humans visited the site, they scavenged from the trapped animals, but they didn't get trapped in the numbers that the actual predators did. They understood the danger, they could recognize the signs of danger without having to experience it personally. They could warn others. This is how humans competed in a world where they were physically weaker than most of their competitors. They didn't beat the predators in a fight. They simply outsmarted them, and over thousands of years, that outsmarting added up to something decisive. Every hunt that succeeded because of superior planning was a hunt the predators didn't get to make. Every prey animal that humans took was an animal the dire wolves or saber-tooth cats wouldn't eat. In a landscape where food was always scarce, where survival depended on consistent access to calories, those incremental advantages became extinction-level disadvantages for the predators. The arithmetic of extinction wasn't dramatic. It didn't require humans to be apex predators themselves. It required only that they be good enough, smart enough, persistent enough. Over generations, this grinding advantage shifted the balance of power in ways that the great carnivores couldn't counter. A saber-toothed cat hunts by ambush and raw power. When that hunt fails, it fails completely. The cat goes hungry. A human hunting party, by contrast, can adjust strategy mid-course. They can lay traps. They can follow prey across impossible distances. They can preserve meat for lean times. They can share knowledge across generations about where to find animals, which routes the herds take, which seasons bring which opportunities. This capacity for accumulated learning is invisible in the fossil record. You cannot see planning in a bone, yet it was, perhaps, the deadliest weapon any creature on that continent possessed. Hold on. I need to pause here because this is where the evidence gets truly specific, and if you want to understand not just what happened to these creatures, but exactly how it happened, the mechanisms that turned a manageable decline into total collapse, that's where things become technical very quickly. Our complete guide to the extinction of Pleistocene megafauna. The predators, the prey, the climate shifts, the human arrival patterns, the timeline of decline, that's all mapped out with precision in the guide available in the description and pinned at the top of the comments. It goes far deeper into the isotope data, the radiocarbon dating, the geographic progression of extinction waves across the continent. This is a paid resource, and it's the place where all the specifics come together. What we know from the record is this: the extinctions didn't happen all at once. They happened in waves, and those waves followed, almost perfectly, the expansion routes of human populations into new territories. When humans arrived in a region for the first time, the megafauna that had lived there, untouched, for tens of thousands of years, began to decline within a few centuries, sometimes within a few generations. The saber-tooth cats at La Brea disappeared around 11,000 years ago. Humans had arrived in Southern California roughly 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, depending on which research you consult. But the intense human hunting pressure in the region, the proliferation of kill sites, the evidence of systematic predation on prey species, that intensified dramatically around 12,000 years ago. The timing is too close to be coincidence. Across North America, mammoth populations crashed hardest in the Great Plains between 13,000 and 12,000 years ago. This is precisely when the Clovis culture appeared in the archaeological record. A people whose stone tools are found in direct association with mammoth remains, whose hunting strategies were specifically evolved to take down the largest herbivores on the continent. Within 1,000 years, mammoths were effectively gone from most of their range. Giant ground sloths, which had survived multiple ice ages and climate shifts, vanished from South America around 10–50 years ago, shortly after human populations fully occupied that continent. Woolly rhinoceroses disappeared from Eurasia during the same window when human hunting pressure intensified across the steppe. This wasn't random. This was a pattern, and patterns, in paleontology, tell stories. Yet here's what makes this complicated. Climate was changing too. The last glacial maximum gave way, slowly at first, then more rapidly, to warmer conditions. The ice sheets retreated. The landscape transformed. The grasslands became forests. The forests became different forests. Animals that had thrived in steppe conditions found their preferred habitat shrinking. So was it humans? Was it climate? The answer, frustratingly for anyone who wants a clean narrative, is that it was both, and the interaction between the two created something far more lethal than either alone. A mammoth herd under stress from changing climate could potentially adapt, migrate, shift their range. But a mammoth herd under simultaneous stress from hunting pressure and habitat loss couldn't do all three. They couldn't move fast enough to outrun the loss of their food sources and the humans pursuing them at the same time. The predators faced the same squeeze. Human hunting pressure, applied to populations already vulnerable due to environmental stress, was the difference between a manageable decline and extinction. This is the secret I promised you at the beginning. This is what took decades for paleontologists to accept, what the fossils and the evidence finally forced them to acknowledge. The great predators of the Pleistocene did not vanish because of one force. They vanished because of two forces pressing down simultaneously, and humans were one of them. For over 100,000 years, the megafauna coexisted with our species. Coexistence is possible. Coexistence had been happening. But coexistence requires a balance. It requires that the pressure from one threat remains within the tolerance of the species facing it. Climate change alone, most of these creatures could have survived it. They had survived earlier glacial cycles. Their bodies were built for cold. Their instincts guided them toward resources. They would have shifted, adapted, persisted. Hunting pressure alone, humans were resourceful, but we were few. A band of 20 hunters cannot eliminate a continent's mammoths through persistence alone. The mathematics doesn't work. But both happening in the same century, the same decade, that was the breaking point. That was the equation that tipped populations from decline into collapse. A saber-tooth cat with a dwindling prey base because the climate is turning against large herbivores doesn't need much additional stress to fail. a dire wolf pack watching the megafauna they depend on migrate away from their territory and simultaneously facing human hunters competing for the same remaining animals, that is a predator with no options left. A giant ground sloth retreating into shrinking forest patches while human populations expand into those same spaces faces a closing door that it cannot open again. The fossil record shows us this in detail. We see megafauna disappear first in regions where human populations arrived and intensified earliest. We see them persist longest in the far north, where human pressure was lightest and came latest. We see extinction dates clustering between 13 and 10,000 years ago, precisely the window when climate was most unstable and human populations most established. The timing is not random. The geography is not accidental. Frankly, this is the part that still bothers me. Our species didn't eradicate these creatures out of malice or ignorance. We were surviving. We were doing what animals do, gathering calories, feeding our families, using the resources available to us. We were not cruel. We were not uniquely destructive. We were simply present, and present in increasing numbers, at the precise moment when the world was becoming hostile to the largest animals on Earth. That is the revelation. Not that humans hunted mammoths, not that climate changed, but that the two together created a cascade that smaller animals could weather and larger animals could not. The giants had no escape, they had no buffer, they had nowhere to run that was not already being hunted, nowhere to hide that was not already disappearing. So this is what you need to understand about the end of the Pleistocene. It was not a dramatic apocalypse. It was a slow contraction. It was a closing of doors, one by one, until the giants had nowhere left to go. And at the moment when climate and hunting pressure aligned, when the two forces pressed down together, extinction became inevitable. The world we inherited was shaped by loss. The continents were emptied of a scale of life we will never see again. We became the inheritors of a diminished Earth, and we have spent the rest of our existence since then creating new ecosystems in place of the ones we inherited. We rebuilt the world, deliberately or otherwise. The mammoths, the mastodons, the saber-tooth cats, the dire wolves, they are gone, but they are not forgotten. They are written in the bones we dig up, in the caves where our ancestors drew their images, in the genetic record of the elephants and wildcats that survived them. They are written in the landscape itself, in the shapes of forests that would look different if ground sloths still pruned their canopies, in the composition of grasslands that would be different if mammoth herds still roamed them. Remember that these creatures were not distant myths or strange reptiles from another geological age. They walked where you live. They drank from rivers that still exist. They breathed air that was, in every chemical sense, the same air you breathe. And their extinction was not an act of God or an asteroid impact. It was the result of a world changing and a species adapting to that change too efficiently, too rapidly, with too little restraint. That is the weight of human history. We did not destroy the Ice Age giants through cruelty. We destroyed them by surviving. Thank you for walking through the Pleistocene with me today. If you want to explore these extinctions in deeper detail, the specific evidence at each site, the competing theories, the genetic studies that changed how we understand the end of the Ice Age, I've written a complete guide that goes far beyond what we covered here. You'll find it linked in the description and pinned in the comments. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and join me next time as we stand face to face with the creatures that came after, the survivors, the inheritors, the animals that learned to live in the world the megafauna left behind.